Without being able to reach a unanimous decision, the jury in the Aurora Theater shooting trial handed down a life sentence with no chance for parole last Friday. One victim's brother tweeted his support of the single juror that was against issuing a death sentence, while suggesting that the $5 million spent on the case could have been spent on mental health in Colorado. David, this decision came out after we were taped last week, 5 o'clock. I think a lot of eyes were looking at the TV screens, Twitter feeds, whatever have you. There was shock, there was surprise, a lot of talk about, with some of the death penalty in Colorado, talk about capital punishment. I don't know if we're still going to get there, but let's stick with the decision. Were you surprised at how it came out?
No, because you can certainly understand the case of the viewpoint of that one juror, and there were actually two others who were undecided, to say, of course, it's an extremely heinous crime with great premeditation, but this is the phase where the community decides, and the jurors are asked to make their own judgment. They're not just finding facts as they did before. And you could say, well, if it weren't for the mental illness, which is unquestionably there, then he wouldn't have perpetrated that crime, and so we choose not to impose the death penalty. I think if I'd been on the jury, I would have voted the other way. I was rooting for capital punishment, but I also respect the process and the system. And the prosecuting team and the defense team both did an outstanding job, and this is an example of the system working. It would have been wrong to take away, in a state which has chosen to have capital punishment, to take that decision away and just do a plea bargain at the beginning. What we had was the way it's supposed to work, where the community represented by the jurors made the decision. And you can agree or disagree with that decision. Maybe in this conversation we're supposed to have about the death penalty, maybe there's some discussion about whether that final phase has to be a unanimous decision or not. But I'd say kudos to all those around, and also for that one relative you mentioned, that certainly wasn't representative of the large majority of the victims' families, it seemed. It seemed they were understandably saddened that this guy gets to spend the rest of his life contemplating his theory about how he added value to himself by murdering other people.
Ben, I tend to agree on the point that I don't think Brockler should be criticized for pursuing the death penalty sentence, because I think some people look at this, there's this many millions of dollars spent in the case, you should have taken the plea bargain. But he really was representing the community. I remember Scott Robinson talking about that as some analysis right when the decision came down. It's if the community is going that way, the district attorney would have that duty to go forward. What did you think of that decision and from the case?
Let me begin by first congratulating and thanking the jury, because one thing about our system of jurisprudence, being tried by a jury of your peers, they did their job, they did it well, and they should be commended and thanked for all of the hours they spent and devoted to this case. When it comes to George Brockler, I disagree. I think, the idea is when you're an elected official, you're to serve and represent, but you're also supposed to use your best judgment based on the facts and the information available to you. And I will submit, and I don't disagree with the anguish in the community. I anguish over it. I'm angry over what this man did. And I agree with the jury. There's no question as to his guilt. There's no question as to his mental culpability. We all agree on that. He's guilty. The only question is what's the appropriate punishment. And I think the DA there probably had a pretty good sense, based on the broader community conversation, that I think the majority of Coloradans don't favor the death penalty, by and large. And I think that he could have considered doing the plea bargain, saving the time, the expense, the media circus. I think the one relative of the one victim had a good point. I know that not all of the relatives of all of the victims share that point of view, but I think the elected DA had an additional responsibility. When you look at the General Assembly, when you're in the legislature, your job is not just take a poll of your neighbors and do whatever they tell you to do. Your job is to assess the legislation in light of the facts and the information made available to you as the representative of your district. The DA serves in a representative capacity also.
Ed, do you think what the criticism that George Brockler is getting from one end or the other, support or criticism, is going to impact future DAs thinking about if they should pursue the death penalty?
I think the criticism that George Brockler is getting is a little bit unique in some ways, because he's not just the DA who is prosecuting this case. He is a DA viewed as a rising star in